Dear Sir, which I know is a bit sexist, but I'm imagining it's a man. Right. Dear Sir, I'm writing to complain about the service I received in your store. Do you especially train your staff to be rude, incompetent and unhelpful? If so, congratulations. Because that's exactly how they behave. All I wanted was to buy a pair of shoes. Isn't that the concept behind a shoe shop? Your staff acted like having a customer was actually a huge inconvenience. I've recently returned from holiday in America, and the service in the US was fantastic. The staff were both knowledgeable and helpful. You could learn a lot from American retailers. I think it's because the American consumer just demands so much more. Your average American has very high standards. Well, yeah, except when it comes to universal healthcare, foreign policy, and the regulation of Wall Street. Racial integration, the fair distribution of wealth, and gay rights. Impartial news reporting, fair elections, and the rise of xenophobia. Protection of the environment, levels of literacy, and the proper separation of church and state. A fair legal system, affordable higher education, the continued use of the death penalty. Holding prisoners without trial, levels of obesity, and open-mindedness. OK, apart from that, America has got it sussed. Realising that you probably stopped reading this some time ago, I signed myself Joe Fuck You Caulfield. Thank you. I had a very weird thing when I was writing that because you get so used to sort of casual emails, so I couldn't remember the last time I'd written a kind of Dear Sir letter, and there's something very weird about it. It's because it's a Dear Sir letter, I immediately started using very archaic language. Do you know what I mean? It's like talking quite normally, then when it's a Dear Sir, it's like I'm in Great Expectations or something. It was like, oh, I'm writing about the visit to your emporium on the 10th of January in the year of our Lord 2012. It's like Brian Sewell had entered me, or something, which is both horrible and unlikely, I think. Thank you.
That's great. Now up against them from their opponents, please welcome Keir McAllister.
Thank you. Now, there's a bit of a preamble to this as well. I was cleaning, I'm getting married in a couple of weeks, and, thank you very much, and our house, as like most prospective grooms, is just full of bridal magazines, right, wall to wall, right? I don't know why women need bridal magazines. You're never going to get a groom magazine, right? Because it consists of one page, and on it would say, "Are you fucking sure about this?" Right? So the house filled, and I was digging through it. I was looking for something, and I came across, in amongst all these things, some stories that I had written for my standard grade English exam. Okay? Now, I don't know that feeling that you get when you wake up after a really hard night's drinking and you look in the mirror and you go, fuck, was that me? Right? It's the same kind of feeling when you pick up things that you've written when you're 15, right? It's that level of embarrassment. So I'm going to read one of you now, and maybe Ian Rankin can give his opinion as well. Now, this story was I called it Seduced and Abandoned. Now, I know what you're thinking. It sounds like a Mills and Boon have gone into date rape novels, right? But I actually stole the title from a Hue and Cry song, which that's a springboard to go from, right? That's the level of self-indulgence we're dealing with here, right? So I was 15 when I wrote this, and the story, just to give you an overview, it was about a man called Mr. Phillips, who all he did was sat in front of his television because he had nothing going on in his life. I called him Mr. Phillips because I thought Mr. Toshiba was not subtle enough, right? So he's sitting there, and what happens is the repossession man turns up to take his TV away, right? But in my symbolic world, he sits in front of the telly with him, right? And they end up sitting there, and then a policeman turns up to find out where the repo man's gone, and he ends up in front of the telly, and then the electricity eventually gets cut off, and the repo man and the policeman leave, and Mr. Phillips shoots himself, right? That's the narrative arc of this story, right? So the excerpt that I'm going to read from, right, is when the repossession man first meets Mr. Phillips, who's sitting in front of his telly, right? There he sat. I was 15 when I wrote this, right? I made Adrian Mole look like George Clooney, right? Right. There he sat, bathed in the warm Chernobyl glow of the screen. It was Mr. Phillips. He was between 25 and 37. Specific. He was dressed in brown cords, a brown cardigan complete with brown stains all down the front, where obviously his foot had missed his mouth at some point because he was too busy watching the screen. Quite how they can make the brown stains out of the brown cardigan, I wasn't quite sure. He wore thick black rimmed glasses which emphasised his half-closed eyes, glazed with a look of sheer detachment. He turned his head slowly to look directly at the repossession man. His face was expressionless like an apple. He blinked slowly twice, then turned back towards the screen. I have come to take your TV away, Mr. Phillips. Do you understand? But Mr. Phillips wasn't taking anything in. The repo man reached for the off switch on the telly, but in doing so himself glanced at the screen, a glance which couldn't have lasted longer than a millisecond, yet it was enough to discover the artificial utopia, enough to see the reflection of a society we could all wish we could live in. In that second, he reached the decision. He was going to abandon this crummy job, leave his family and his 3 kids, and give everything to the Glow. In that second, he submitted his attention, his devotion, his life to the hypnotic images of the suburban fantasy. He became seduced, and he sat down next to Mr. Phillips, and he began to watch Neighbours.
Well, Ian, do you want to give him a little bit of feedback on that story? I mean,
I'm hugely impressed by that. Speaking as someone who at 15 wrote a short story called Paradox named after a Hawkwind song, which was about a guy who thought he was president of the United States, but he was actually in an insane asylum. And my teacher said to me, he said, "That's interesting, Ian, but why do you call it paradox?" I said, "It's a good word, isn't it?" He said, "Well, maybe you should look it up in the dictionary before you use it." But yeah, no, I'm very taken with that. I did want you to follow the shoe shop woman and kill her, and bury her under shoes. I thought that would be quite a good ending to that story. But the letter was fun. But he's got the edge, hasn't he?
Because let's get the audience to decide. Okay, well, thanks very much, Ian. Okay, we need to dish out some points. So if you think that Joe should get the points, give me a cheer now. And if you think Kia should get the points, give me a cheer now. I'll give 2 points to each team. How about that? It seems fair, doesn't it? It seems fair. They're both very good questions. Right, okay, we're just about to get into round 3, but before we do, we've got Ian with us, which we're all very delighted about, having Ian with us. So there's a few of your fans here tonight, Ian, so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience some top tips on what makes a good detective novel.
What did somebody say? Sex? None of that in my books. In the third Rebus novel, there was a big sex scene in the middle, and it was about a serial killer as well. And my editor, and he said, "Oh, Ian, do we need all these gruesome descriptions of the murder, and do we need the sex scene?" He said, "I don't like that." I said, "What, so you can have a crime novel with no sex and no violence?" And he went, "Yeah, basically." So that was it, because they're really embarrassing to write sex scenes. I mean, they're quite embarrassing to read, but they're really embarrassing to write. No, for a good crime novel, you need a kind of twisty story, a beginning, middle, and end, a crime investigation, resolution. But it's also a way of getting all the dark stuff out of your system. That's what I find is that anything that happens to me, I go out here tonight and somebody nearly runs me over, I can go home and kill them. And this on a very basic level is why crime writers do what they do. It's just that we get to play God, and the world that we create will work out the way we want it to work out. And anybody who's dissed us in our lives, I had a professor at university when I was at uni in Edinburgh. I just transposed 2 letters of his name and made him a really awful person in one of the books. And everybody knew it was him, but he couldn't have touched me. And some people take this to extremes. There's a person I know in not in the UK. And she, a guy dumped her in a very unceremonious manner. She was very friendly with lots of crime writers around the world. So she wrote to all of us and she said, "Look, here's the guy's name. Can you put him in your next book and have something really horrible happen to him?" She then waited 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months for all of us to write our next books, all of us to get them printed, send her copies, and then she got this huge box of books together. We post-it notes in, and this guy got this box and he opened it a post-it note, and there he was getting stabbed, raped, you name it. I think Val McDermott stuck a broken bottle up his arse. I was generous. I made him a gorilla at Edinburgh Zoo with impotency problems. So I think the main thing I'm saying is it's great fun being a crime writer. You get to play God, and it's very cathartic, and also you tend to make a wee bit of money at it as well if you're any good. So yeah, go ahead, give it a go. Thanks.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, that's Ian Rankin. Okay, right, now we've got a game now, and we're going to need you again in this game, Ian. And basically, in your line of work, and as any good detective would tell you, you should never judge a book by its cover. But in this game, that is exactly what we're going to do, okay? So, each of the panel is going to come up and is going to read out a statement, okay? A statement about themselves, and you have to see if you can pick which person is telling the truth, okay? So, some of these we did last week with the psychologist Richard Wiseman, who knows a little bit about how to spot a liar. So we're going to see how you do compared to him. Okay, so first up, Susan.
I'm Susan Calman, and when I was 17, I was an extra in Taggart.
I'm Keir McAllister, and when I was 18, I was an extra in Rebus.
I'm Jo Caulfield, and when I was 19, I was an extra on Hamish Macbeth.
Okay, Ian, do you want to step up and have a little think about, Hamish Macbeth? That seems very plausible with that accent.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of there were some interesting casting decisions in Hamish Macbeth, weren't there? You see, I'm kicking myself now. I've never watched a Rebus episode. Because if I'd ever watched a Rebus, I would have been able to tell maybe whether you were lying or not. And Taggart, it's been a while since I've watched a Taggart. I'm looking for somebody who's maybe either been plucked out of high school or had some acting training. Somebody who maybe fancied their chances on the small screen before they took up comedy, or at the same time as taking up comedy. It's a tough one. I think I would have to go for... I'm going to go for Kieran Rebus. What the hell?
Oh, Kieran Rebus. What do we do? Do you think Kier's telling the truth, ladies and gentlemen? No. Richard, what do you think? Richard Wiseman. No, he doesn't think Kier's telling the truth at all. Okay, who is telling the truth, please?
And if I could just say, just a note, I wasn't an extra. I was shocked schoolgirl from the left. So it was a little bit more than an extra. Ready? Ready? You ready? You ready? Bang!
Okay, well, that's so far no points for you, Ian. But we'll have another go. So first up, we've got another one here that you have to see if you can spot who is telling the truth. First up, we've got Jo.
I'm Jo Caulfield, and I trained as a white witch.
Keir.
I'm Keir McAllister, and I trained as a vicar.
And Susan.
I'm Susan Calman, and I trained as a vicar.
Well, I've got a problem with this because we don't have vicars in Scotland. We have reverends or ministers. So unless you were doing your training south of the border for the Church of England, it leaves me in a bizarre position having to say that the person that's telling the truth has to be Jo Caulfield.
Well, who was telling the truth, please? It was Keir McAllister. Yes.
Church of England,
He's a right weirdo. You don't even know half
It's gone now. Oh, don't worry. No, got it out my system.
Okay, they're very interesting. Well, that's still no points, Ian.
Would Richard have got that one?
He did, yes.
He did get that
Yes, he did.